Our next film it had a quieter sort of release, well, not quieter in our circles, but I assume like quieter in terms of, pop culture. And that's King Richard. And King Richard is a biographical comedy, that is directed by Ronaldo Marcus Green. This is a big awards contender right here. And one of the main reasons is because Will Smith is the lead actor. He plays Richard Williams, father of Venus and Serena Williams. This is a movie about how he was the parent of these two future tennis prodigies and sort of how their lives came about. The film also stars Aunjanue Ellis as their mother, Brandy, and then the two Serena and Venus Williams, the Williams sisters, they're played by Sania Sidney and Demi Singleton. Now, this movie, as I kind of mentioned before, it's getting a big old awards push. Will Smith, I think it's a done deal that he gets nominated as Best Actor. The narrative is baked in, but we're going to talk about whether or not the movie's actually good. And also, this movie has a real shot at not just being nominated for Best Picture, but, it could be a win. I think it's one of the likelier films to win Best Picture, although I don't believe it is like the front runner right now. One of the reasons people are looking at it pretty closely, though, for Best Picture is because it did premiere at Telluride, and so it has data on its side. Best Picture almost always starts at Telluride and then does the festival circuit from there. This movie is now on HBO Max, and it's also playing in theaters. It hasn't made a lot of money, only $8.2 million, but we don't know how it's doing on HBO Max. It does seem to me, Will, I don't know if you agree, it seems to me like something people would be like, let's just watch it at home, right? Like this doesn't seem like we got to get the kids a babysitter. Let's head on over to King Richard, right?
Yeah, no, initially before the awards conversation was coming into play, I was just thinking about watching it at home. So I don't blame anyone for just popping it on to HBO Max.
Yeah, there's even a scene in the movie where the Williams family sits down and watches Cinderella. I imagine a lot of people look just like that watching King Richard. Exactly. It's like, let's watch it again.
Yeah.
What did you learn from it? No, but I think this movie's getting a little bit of backlash. It's getting a little bit of, because it mostly takes place in the 90s. People are kind of looking at this movie and being like, I don't want a movie about their dad. I want a movie about Venus and Serena.
I thought it was an odd choice when the project was announced. I was like, okay.
Well, I'll say this, man. We should talk about what the movie is, not what it isn't. We got to mention that Venus and Serena, the real life people, they are executive producers, and they've been out there saying like, we want to make this movie about our dad. And, I'm sure there's going to be a Venus and Serena movie that's more about them. And I think that this movie too sort of is about how it starts with King Richard, with Will Smith as the lead. He's really like the main character. He's driving the plot. But over the course of the movie, he kind of takes slowly, he becomes less of an important character to the whole film. And over time, it does become about Venus and Serena. So I wanted to address that right away. Now, I understand not everyone's going to agree with that. But I'll say right here, I think this movie's a total winner. It's definitely one of my favorite films of the year. It's in my top 20 right now. If it did win Best Picture, I'd be pretty happy with it. I think this should be Will Smith's Oscar. And there are two things listeners should know about me in case they don't already. I love tennis movies a lot, and I like sports movies a lot. I like sports movies like this where it's not really about the sport. It's about parenting. It's about being a dad, and it's about kids being raised by someone like Richard Williams, who's a bit eccentric. He's to some people he might seem a little bit off, but he has a plan for them, and he's a bit imperfect himself. He's got his own issues, and this movie is sort of about how these two young kids kind of have to rise through all of these obstacles through the confidence and support of their parents in order to become who we know they're going to be today. Because that's the thing, we know Venus and Serena are two of the greatest athletes of like the modern era, the two best tennis players right now, arguably. And I think that's pretty safe to say. There's a couple others who are sneaking up on him, I'm sure. But but what about you, Will? When I watched King Richard, I knew I loved it, but I did not walk out of the movie being like, can't wait till Will sees this. I didn't expect this would be like a Will movie. You know what I mean? Like maybe a movie you like, but I don't expect you to be as enthusiastic about it. But am I wrong?
I enjoyed it more than I anticipated, just because I think when I saw the trailer for this movie and I heard about the build up to it, I had an expectation that it would hit certain storytelling beats. It would get a certain type of performance out of Will Smith, and whether it would win me over or dissuade me, I guess would just depend on my mood at the time. But I guess I went in with a pretty good mood because I wound up enjoying the film more than not. I mean, certainly I think it's flawed, and I would argue that does have some things I think are worth criticizing. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like a primo dad movie, sort of in the same vein as something like Ford versus Ferrari, where you know what's going to happen, you know what type of movie you're going to expect from this, but it hits those beats pretty well, and it gets you energized and gets you hooked into it. And even for whatever it is, like 2.5 hours long, it's pretty breezy and enjoyable to watch, and it's a fun time. I mean, it hits the crowd pleasing marks that it wants to strive for, and by and large, I think it's a solid time at the movies.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Ford versus Ferrari comparison, that is pretty interesting. I'd say what this movie has that movie doesn't, even though I do think they're in the same zone, is I think this movie is, though, a bit deeper. I think that it's a lead performance, and I think the politics of the family itself are way more interesting to me. Like when I think back on Ford versus Ferrari, like I remember the really cool, like I remember how Mangold just like danced with the racing scenes, and that was like the main draw of it. And surely in this movie, I mean, the tennis in this is really, really solid. It's thrilling. I think they did some wonky. I think they did some trickery with the tennis to make it look even better. But I say this as like a tennis, like I love all things tennis, and I was pretty happy with it.
Oh, really? I didn't know that about you. I thought the tennis scenes were fine.
You don't know, Julia Tatey and I constantly, like, unprovoked, will be like, tennis, by the way.
Well, you'll have to have a conversation with my sister. She is a tennis player.
We'll get her in the group chat.
Sure.
Hey, I'm a tennis player, Will Ash, and I played tennis. You didn't know that?
Oh, really? In
high school.
Oh, wow. For how long?
I played 2 years of high school because I also played soccer, and so I was also into theater, right? So there were 2 years where I did theater and choir instead of tennis. So my heart got pulled in all directions.
Had to choose between sports and athletes, or
sports.
It
was a real high school musical. Upbringing.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I mean, I thought the tennis scenes were fine. It was a lot of like kind of like close-ups and then like long shots in a way that I felt like it didn't quite match the energy of the tennis themselves. But I thought
hard disagree.
I thought the editing kind of made up for that in terms of bringing that energy that you need for those scenes. So, I mean, I guess it wasn't quite as fond as those scenes as you were, but I think they did the job. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, what do you think about the Will Smith performance here? The guy's obviously up for Best Actor. I think he has a pretty good shot for it. I mean, outside of this movie, he's due. Like he's been nominated twice, and I don't know if I would have. I think this performance though, I like this performance more than those other two. It's not my favorite Will Smith performance, but in terms of like if he's going to win an award for one, what I like about this one is we usually get Will Smith, the charmer. The guy with all the swagger, he's a little bit like the precursor to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, where it always just feels very, not manufactured, but it always feels like very pre-planned. Like how many times is he going to lose in a fight? Like how are we going to make sure he looks like a winner all the time? And in this movie, I think he's way more vulnerable, way more well-rounded, I thought. Like I really like how he brings, like, it's almost cartoonish what he does with this character, but the fact that he does it like that, like the hunch and the accent and how he responds to people. And it's a very unlikable character at times, which I appreciate because it's a more interesting character to do in a movie. At the same time, I've just constantly rooted for the guy. And I just found, I don't think Will Smith ever like perfectly disappeared into the character, but there were times when it did happen for me. And that almost never happens for me with Will Smith. Like I'm always thinking like, hey, it's Will Smith, it's Will Smith doing the Will Smith thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think compared to some of his recent films, like he's just been on this trail of not doing a lot of great films, just to be blunt. Like he did like Aladdin. I know some people support Gemini Man. I wasn't crazy about that one. Bright, Collateral Beauty, Suicide Squad, Focus, Winter's Tale, After Earth. It's been tough. it's been tough. Yeah, for Will Smith. I thought Concussion was all right. It wasn't like a film I would probably rewatch, but I thought he was fine in it. And I think I'm sort of in the same camp with King Richard for him, where it feels like a performance. Like it feels like a movie star performance to me in a way that I didn't feel it quite like, I never felt like I was watching something outside of Will Smith's performance. Like I felt like he was giving his all in it, and I think he committed to it, but I didn't feel like it felt as natural as, say, I'm looking up her name, the woman that played Brandy in the film,
Ingenue Ellis.
Oh, Ingenue Ellis. Yeah, I thought she was fantastic. I think her performance is a lot more natural, and I felt like because she was working off of Will Smith, she was able to kind of bring him down to earth in some scenes where
she's key to the movie. If without her, I think this movie falls way too squarely into that trap that I think people are knocking it for.
Absolutely.
Which is, lionizing this man. But at the same time, I want to make it clear that if you were around in the 90s, which we were, but I mean, we weren't like, we weren't super tuned in or anything, but the perception around Richard Williams, even post 90s, if you're like in the tennis world, is that the guy was like super, like, people didn't like him. People looked down on him. People said pretty awful things about the guy. People considered him a showboat and off his rocker. And I think unfairly so. And I think this movie is sort of like trying to reclaim, like, okay, yeah, like he's a bit eccentric and he's got his own way of doing things and he frustrated people. But you know what? His sisters love him to pieces. And I think that's ultimately what this movie's about. And I think that's why I connected with it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, but looking at it as a Will Smith vehicle, I agree that because he's been trying to push away from that like Big Willie style, like I'm, everyone's favorite leading man. I'm just, effortlessly charming, kind of doing my thing. Like I want to say ever since like that 7 pounds Hancock era, he's been kind of trying to play more prickly characters. Like obviously he goes back to like doing that with like his old Will Smith thing with like Bad Boys for Life and like Aladdin to some extent. But, clearly like Suicide Squad and Collateral Beauty are character in those movies. He's playing characters that are meant to be a little bit rough around the edges, like not the Will Smith that we're used to or accustomed to from the 90s and 2000s. And I think this movie is better at kind of blending those two sensibilities as far as getting the traditional like Big Willie style, like just fills the screen up with his energy and enthusiasm. It's like you can't look away from Will Smith. He just has that movie star charisma that is becoming more and more of a rarity on the big screen right now. But at the same time, like you said, like he isn't always an agreeable character. It kind of reminds me of when we were talking about Finch with Tom Hanks, where like that's a character like he's doing the Tom Hanks thing, but he's also a little bit harder to read and it's a little bit harder to like at times because he's kind of prickly and he's stubborn in some ways. So I think that was effective, but like I said, I think his performance, it always felt like a performance to me. I don't think it felt as natural to me as I guess it felt to you, as far as making me believe that he was Richard Williams in the movie.
Hey, look, if I'm looking at his other performances, I think compared to those, I just felt like his heart was in this one. Like he really wanted to do a great performance, doubt. Right? Yeah. And I really like, I really respect that from the guy. And I think that's partly why, like, I want him to be rewarded for his effort, because I think he's the kind of actor who is always trying to like deliver to audiences what he thinks they want from him. And I think he's rightfully had the inclination that people want more Will Smith, like they've gotten Will Smith in the past. Will Smith as the superhero, Will Smith as like the smooth talking guy. I think this movie though is a little bit more of like, all right, well, I'm just going to kind of take a big old risk. And I think part of the reason his heart's in it, in that risk, is because you can kind of feel that he's sort of putting that same level of like, this is what it means to be a dad that he would do to his own kids. There's a really great line in this where he says, the world never had respect for Richie Williams, talking about himself, but they're going to respect you. I think this is the chief reason why I think like, yeah, this movie is not about Venus and Serena. Ultimately, it is about Richard Williams' love for his daughters. And that's what the movie is. And I get it. Like if you're looking at this movie and you're saying, well, I don't want that. All right. But I don't know. I don't think it's super fair to be like, to expect something from this movie that's not offering. Like if it just wanted to do the simple cut and dry, here's a story of Venus and Serena, like cutting through, busting down the barriers. Hey, I'm there for that too, because I think they're truly inspiring. And I could weirdly see this movie getting a sequel. But look, I'm glad we got this, though. I think it was a little bit more unique in that respect, and I think that it's a solid crowd pleaser. I think people are really going to like this. Like people who go into it pretty open-minded, who know at least part of the story, even people who have no idea who Richard Williams is. I could see people just being like, I didn't know that, and being inspired. And this movie is also funny. Like this movie has a good sense of humor. Jon Bernthal really cuts loose here. He's really fun to watch, and I think the two daughters are also like, they come in clutch. I mean, again, like with Anjanou Ellis as the mom, like if you don't get the ensemble right, then Will Smith's on an island, and he's not. He's being boosted and supported by the rest of the cast who are constantly, keeping up with him and holding their own against him, even though he's the kind of person who can be so larger than life, it's overwhelming. They're doing it like they're making it look easy, I think. I think the Venus and Serena, like they really come into their own over the course of the movie. And yeah, that's why by the end of it, I was just like, this thing works. This thing, like package, like sign, seal it, send it to the masses. People are going to really love this. I think that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I certainly admire Will Smith for making what I think is a smaller, even more personal movie here. Obviously, I think, if we're looking at this movie as far as Will Smith's narrative, like he's clearly been on the outs as far as like we said, it's been about a decade since, well, unless you count Suicide Squad, he's really haven't had a major hit in a while. Like it's been a lot of flops. It's been a lot of well, actually that's not true because Bad Boys.
Well, yeah, Bad Boys was like one of the highest grossing movies of last year. Sure. Aladdin made over $1 billion.
That's true. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more critically speaking, he hasn't really had
right. Like the double threat of like it made a lot of money and people loved it and it had pop culture impact. So triple threat.
Right. But like looking at the past like 2 decades, it's clear that Will Smith really wants an Oscar. He's been doing roles that clearly try to favor that type of performance. And some he's gotten close, like we said, with Ali and Pursue Happiness. And oftentimes he hasn't quite gotten there, like Concussion or
he's smart, though,
Collateral Beauty.
Yeah, he's smart because he doesn't overdo it. Like he attempts it. He goes for it every once in a while, but it's not like DiCaprio, I think, where he's just like clearly obsessed. You know what I mean? He's just like every once in a while he picks a project that you kind of get that sense.
Yeah, like it feels like every like 3 or 4 years he like kind of comes back to like that character Oscar movie.
Yeah. He's like, how about this? And everyone's like, no. And he's like, all right, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's
all right. Fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
That's fine. No big. Let me try this again. So I think this is, I imagine unless like Benedict Cumberbatch really picks up steam or I don't know, the Oscar race for Best Actor is always going to be fickle. So who knows? Maybe there's going to be a performance. I'm hearing Leonardo DiCaprio is really good and Don't Look Up. I'm hearing Andrew Garfield. We'll talk about him in a little bit.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going to happen? But I think he has certainly a better shot here than he's ever had at winning an Oscar. And
he's got way more buzz. He's got way more buzz than those other ones you mentioned and more. So I could see it. I could really see it.
Everyone likes Will Smith. Like, who doesn't like Will Smith?
Yeah, the industry likes Will Smith, and that's the key to an Oscars race.
Sure. So I think, it could happen. I think for me, though, looking at the film as a film, I think the movie doesn't quite juggle the balance between hearing or seeing Richard as like this kind of crackly, hard to reckon with person while also kind of glorifying him and recognize like clearly what he did paved the way for Venus and Serena being the star athletes that they are. I think it's a tricky balance. The movie doesn't quite land, but I think as an entertaining dad movie, it finds that right balance of heart and entertainment and humor to make it an enjoyable ride. So I think it works better as a crowd-pleasing piece of entertainment than as a sturdy character drama. But, by and large, I think it's a fun, enjoyable film, and I certainly got more out of it than I anticipated.
Yeah, I definitely had that feeling during this movie. I mentioned this in my review. It's like, they don't really make them like this anymore, where it's like, it's safe.
A mid-budget,
I guess. Mid-budget, character focus. It's about something really interesting. And it's just done really well. Like, I felt like every scene had a lot of urgency and there was always something interesting happening in every scene. And that can be kind of rare these days. A lot of films drag, these days, unfortunately. But this one, even though it is pretty long, it's over 2 hours. It didn't drag for me, at least. But all right, let's play our little game.
Yeah, it felt like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. Well, the only thing that did go on a little bit too long was, I think, the last tennis match. I think they should have tightened that up a bit, but that's fine.
Yeah.
It had a really good moment too. All right. Rotten Tomatoes, 172 reviews have been counted on Rotten Tomatoes, Will Ashton. What do you think the percentage score is of people who liked it?
I think critics are probably favorable on this one. So I'm going to say 87%?
92%.
92%.
So
All right.
you've been off by around 5 or so lately, which, that's not bad. I mean, you're guessing out of 100. But yeah, 92%. It's certified fresh. And I took a quick glance at all the Rotten reviews counted so far. I mean, a few people that I know and respect have been pretty negative on the movie. One person that I read pretty regularly gave it a 0 out of 4. That broke my heart a little bit, but hey, what are you going to do?
Oh, wow.
What do you think the audience score is, though, Will Ashton? We have 250 plus verified ratings.
I think it's probably going to be the same as Ghostbusters, probably 96%.
Close, 99%.
Wow.
It's one of the highest audience scores I think we've seen since we started doing this game. Yeah. So that's pretty impressive. What do you think about the cinema score?
Probably A.
Oh, spot on. So
A, all right.
A cinema score. Folks in Las Vegas were like, we like tennis too. So
we like these odds.
There we go. Serve us up more. All right, that's King Richard. It is now available to stream on HBO Max for the next 30 days starting this past Friday, and it is playing in theaters. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.